Good morning, good afternoon, good night, or hello, hello.
Well, yeah, it's actually there's a British comedy. Hello, hello.
Really?
Yeah.
The British say it that way too?
Let me try to
Or are
remember.
they making fun of the French? That's
I'm
what it is.
trying to remember because it's actually a comedy from the 70s or 80s. Uh, I don't remember right now, actually.
All right, I want to make fun of something regarding hellos. So we both know Zorro. You've known Zorro a lot longer than me. I've known him like 5, 6 years.
Well,
He came,
probably you've known him more because you've lived with.
oh yeah, for sure. So he's from Iraq. He spent some time in Africa, and then now he's in America. And he was trying to buy a car, and he saw a Facebook ad or Facebook marketplace thing, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and he wants to make this phone call. And I was like, hey, nobody wants to call at 10 o'clock at night. Stop that. He thought he knew more than me or something. He tried the phone call. So I hear that I hear. He picks up. And then the other person says, hello. That's it. Just plain hello. And then he goes, hello. And then he pauses. And then the other guy doesn't say anything. He's still waiting for Zorro to say something. And then he goes, how are you? And then he pauses again. And for Americans, that is fucking hell. We do hellos very efficiently. It's just hello and right into talking. You better get to your point right away, or somebody's getting angry. I can hear the anger over the phone. Plus, it's 10 o'clock at night. Anyway, he doesn't do that anymore.
I'm guessing he didn't get that car.
No, he got a better deal some other place.
Yeah.
Can you believe you can get a car for $600? He got a car for $600. The fucker's still working now.
Yeah, well,
he's never had any major repairs. It's been 6 years on a $600 car. I feel like I don't know how to do things compared to him, because where he came from, there's a lot more resourcefulness in those countries.
Yeah, I remember my first car in the US cost me a little bit under 4,000. It stayed for about, I would say, 7 years, and then it died.
Hello, enemies of the true religion. I can read that now. All right, let's do some announcements real quick. This is every Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, my time, 8 p.m., whatever the standard time is, UTC or something. Please subscribe and so you don't miss future episodes. Go ahead and chat, and we'll do our best to talk about your questions. We'll focus more on, we'll prioritize like questions where you're trying to learn or criticisms of things we're saying. Let's see. We're going to take some call-ins, first come, first serve. Here's a new thing. Uniting the Cults now has a manifesto. And I titled it End Apostasy Laws Manifesto instead of Uniting the Cults Manifesto, because I'm trying to get others to do it with me rather than it be just a Uniting the Cults thing. There's a link in the description to find it. Our anniversary is coming up, June 14th. We have a very special event. We're going to be talking about the goals, progress over the past year, and next steps. And I'll be joined by Maryam Namazi, Wissam Sharafuddin, Apostle Alauddin, and Zara K. Let's see. We got two other things, but okay. Let's get into the main topic today then. Just continuing what we talked about last time. And I want to reiterate, we're focusing on like the newest kind of person to this stuff. So I'm imagining like a 12-year-old person just became a ex-Muslim, or at least is just questioning or something. And, they don't know a lot. Like they just mostly know, we're going to assume they mostly just know what their parents told them.
But bear in mind that it's actually really the younger people who might be much more able to question these things in a kind of an honest and direct way, without really any kind of contentions, without any intent of
Your kids,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So that kind of curiosity and that kind of inquisitiveness is really
Yeah, what I find with older people sometimes is they think they know better than you know, and then they don't really listen. And I could name some people that you know that have been on the show, but I'd rather not name names. I think
right.
that
Yeah,
would
I mean,
be
it's
really.
once you get to a certain point in life, you believe that you have certain convictions that are so unshakable that it's really hard to even contemplate
But a
change.
lot of those conclusions that we have in our heads, even in old age, were put in our heads before we learned how to critically think.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And uh, it's very rare, but when you're really at a point in life where you're re-examining some of these things at an older age, it really goes to really radical depths where sometimes you really become capable of questioning all that, and to a great extent capable of moving or removing certain things that you thought were really a big part of you that cannot be changed.
So that runs into maybe the another thing we should reiterate. What a person like this sees is, they grew up in a religion, especially extreme scenarios where it's very uniform place where everyone's the same religion,
Mm-hmm.
uh, where you only see one religion. You don't see all the other religions or cultures, ways of living. And so you might be, your thinking is very siloed to the your culture's view of what God is. We're talking about God here. We can talk about all sorts of things like superstitions. By the way, I want to do an episode on superstitions in general, not just jinn.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to focus on stuff like, I was talking to Zora about this yesterday. It's like, so not only does Islam have superstitions in it, explicitly stated in the Quran and Hadith,
Mhm.
but there's also superstitions that lots of Muslims believe that are not recorded anywhere in those two places, and they'll be different depending on where you're coming from. So a Sunni Muslim growing up in Sudan versus a Sunni Muslim growing up in Syria, different set of superstitions.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think if they compared each other's superstitions, one thing that would be happening is they're going to laugh at the other guy's superstitions, even though you're both fucking Sunni Muslims.
Yeah, and one of the issues here, or one of the main issues, is that those differences which start appearing the same way that you have differences appearing between two isolated groups of the same species, for example, and you start seeing differentiation and speciations into two different groups. Um, the same way that you end up with that differentiation, you have the same thing in the case of culture. So when a Muslim is looking at a Christian, they're basically looking at something that originated from the same place, originated from the same root, but then diverged because of whatever different history that the two have gone through. It also emphasizes the fact that religion is just really part of culture. So people who think that when they're thinking, well, I am a religious person because even though I was born a Muslim, I have actually went through a process that convinced myself of the truth of that religion. It's really something that you get from your parents. It's just something that you get through culture, through the people around you, through the
Except for the
whatever.
converts.
Well, the converts are a special case because eventually you have to have some kind of a small seed that would enable you to start questioning part of your identity, including the cultural inheritance that you got from your parents and your surroundings. only once you have that would it be possible to contemplate either leaving the religion altogether or going to a different religion.
Well, so there's apparently research on when it is most likely for people to get into a cult. It is within the first year after leaving another cult.
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, I think the same thing happens in abusive relationships, like an abusive romantic relationship.
Yeah.
If you just got out of one, you're likely to get into another one.
Yeah. What happens is that you got so accustomed to some of basically the scenery that you have around you that come along with the idea that you have a religion. It's a whole package that has so many different things, and you think that this is how things should be, but because there is some aspect that you think is the problem, you try to replace it, but you don't replace it with something altogether different. You just try to take out this component that you think is a problem, and therefore you end up with another religion. And very often, if it's truly the idea of religion as such, or belonging to a cult of whatever type, it's eventually going to dawn on you.
There, some of them, if you go from Islam to Christianity, and today's Christianity is very different than 1,000 years ago. It's probably still a better move, but man, a 10 times better move would be think for yourself. Don't just adopt solutions that people 2,000 years ago came up with.
Yeah, but
in general, I think they do think for themselves more anyway. When they go from Islam to Christianity, there is more of their own thinking by themselves.
I prefer not to say think for themselves, but rather maybe be able to break loose from whatever it is that they had originally. Because eventually, whatever that you're thinking, it's going to be driven by that environment that you have, plus additional factors that others might not have had. So even though there is definitely a sense of empowerment when you're actually moving away from what seems to be the dominant way of thinking, I think it's still controlled by it in an indirect way.
Okay, so now I want to reiterate something that we talked about before, although I'm not sure which part, whether it was the part that we missed, never ended up in the live, or after. So something I say a lot of, we need to study the history of ideas. So when you're considering a set of ideas, you don't only want to look at the ideas that exist today in that field. You want to look at the whole history of the ideas in that field. So to give people an example that isn't religion, this is what we do in physics. I know you disagreed with me a little bit, but let me just say it again. You can go ahead and disagree again. My experience going through physics, I remember the textbook starts like the first section is talking about the old ass ideas that we had about physics going back. Well, before it was really science, when it was still like mythological. Ancient Greek ideas about physics was like that. And then it went into like the first, what we would call scientific theorizing and testing. And then it would go from there, and you could tell there's a chronological order. And I think that's a crucial part of how you teach physics. And I think that makes sense for every field.
Well, like I said last time, from a practical point of view, it's very rare that people spend time talking about the history. You might see some people
a lot of time, but yeah.
What happens typically is that you sprinkle some history here and there, but you don't actually start with a historical overview,
Sure.
Unless you're planning to maybe spend, I don't know, 10 15 minutes at most at the beginning, but it's really not something that
it's not a lot, but you do get exposed to it, and it makes sense to understand why it is that they came up with those kinds of ideas back then compared to how they come up with ideas now. So just a small thing. Karl Popper explained that all scientific theories that we have today evolved from earlier ones And if you trace it back to the earliest things they evolved from, those were mythological ideas, not scientific ones.
Yeah. And I actually would add to this that sometimes when people say, look at all the advancement that we have, it's actually mainly due to the presence of Christianity, for example, as a motivating power that let people come up with all sorts of ideas that happened in the Enlightenment and so on. And this is a kind of an argument that is being brought today very often against a kind of a secular history of science. And it's not untrue that Christianity, for example, played a role, and Islam as well played a role in the what's known as the Golden Age. But at the same time, it's not really a positive role. It's mainly a negative role. Like when you're looking at someone who runs really well, and you're looking behind them, and you see that there's a lion behind them, they're running really well. You can say that this is due to the lion, yeah, but
I'm pretty sure my running form would get worse if there's a lion behind me.
Yeah, but
this is a bad thing. If there was no lion, I just imagine the lion, I would run very nice, very good form, faster probably. I mean, I think that's why we trip in movies, in horror movies where the woman's running away and she trips. That's what would happen to us, I think.
Yeah, well, at least it's going to maximize the speed, and we know the people who can run are the people who are going to be leaving progeny anyway. So it's natural.
Okay,
selection.
so let's get into the history of ideas a little bit, or let me give an example of why this would matter. Here, let me give the extreme goofy example in physics. Imagine somebody says, let's say they're 15 years old or whatever. They're like, you know what? I really love physics. I'm gonna make a goal for myself. I'm gonna make the next physics theory. And let's say their plan is they're not gonna go learn the history of ideas or the existing best ideas right now. They're just gonna go make the best one now. That is literally impossible. You have to know the existing ideas for one reason, just to see if your better idea is better than it. You have to compare and contrast. You have to, you know what I mean? There's no coming up with an idea in a vacuum.
I can attest to that in practical life.
In physics?
I cannot tell you how many times I have, not myself only, anybody who works at an instructional institution, you will receive, sometimes depending on your visibility, you receive so many emails of people coming up with a theory of having demolished general relativity, of having created a new theory, a theory of everything.
Okay.
You look at that thing that's being written. It's obviously being written in a very unprofessional way by someone who has a kind of a mix between an understanding of new age ideas and some fleeting ideas from physics, and they end up with something that from their perspective feels coherent. You can even see equations mixed in, but I see so many of these. I probably have tons of files like this. These people never actually looked at a single textbook really and looked at how things have developed, what kind of knowledge we have at the moment, and what can be done with it. So
why are they, I'm kind of, I mean, I just said the thing that you gave examples of, but it still shocks me that this is happening. How do they think they have a theory that beats the existing one if they don't really understand the existing one? What do they think was wrong with it?
Well, that's exactly the same thing that happens whenever you confront people with any kind of scientific view that appears far removed from everyday experience, and you present that in a kind of a way that is hard for them to actually see the connection. And so they would become more distrustful of the scientific view rather than their own view. And as an example of that, you have flat Earth, the idea of flat Earth, and how people come up with conspiracies that this is actually.
By the way, they're a perfect example of the general thing I was saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, not really though. The flat Earth idea was older than the newer idea we have about.
Well, no, not quite. I mean, it had the reincarnation that we have right now is a completely separate thing from what we had before. It's a kind of a reversion, if you will, or a kind of a reinvention of that same idea in a completely different context.
Okay, let's make it more to the point now about the religion talk, God debate. What I see a lot of is you'll see someone say something like, I don't know, they'll give an argument like, you know, the things look like they're designed, therefore they're designed, so there has to be a designer. They'll say something like that, and they'll make that argument like they think they won something, but you can tell that they think they just came up with it, or it's a great new idea or whatever. It's brand new to them, but it's not brand new to the world.
Yeah.
And it's not brand new to the field. And you can trace that idea back, at least in this particular one. It's a guy named Paley. It's called Paley's Watch. What is it? His story is something like, if you're in the desert and you see a watch, you find a watch there. And then, you know, the concept is something like the desert is like all chaos, disordered atoms or whatever. And the watch is very ordered. How did it get that way? It can't happen on its own or whatever. And they conclude that there's a God. Now, this concept was refuted like shortly after that. And so you could say it's been hundreds of years in the state of it's refuted.
And it goes back to times well before Paley. But Paley's idea was probably the most relevant because it was almost right before the time of Darwin. In fact, if I'm actually not mistaken, Darwin was given an office or a lodging in the same place where Paley. Yeah, it's actually funny.
Yeah, well, here, so let's clarify for everyone. If you don't understand evolution yet, yes, it's very easy to believe what Paley believed. Because before we understood evolution, the historical main conception at the time was that I think it was also the time when the universe was seen as static.
Yeah, at the time there was nothing called cosmology to begin with.
Okay. So the universe was seen as static, meaning like every star has been there the whole time. It doesn't have a life of, you know, birth and then death. And by the way, people who are watching don't know, yes, stars have a birth and a death. There was a time they didn't exist. There's going to be a time where they, should we explain? So it's just a bunch of hydrogen atoms, first of all. And then there's enough coalescing due to gravity. Now there's so much gravity, it overwhelms the, what is it? You know, two atoms in general, in a normal scenario, they can't come together, but with enough gravitational force, you can. Now you have a star, you have atoms fusing. You have the first, that's like the engine of the star. And then when the fuel's all gone, I'm skipping so much. When the fuel's all gone, it dies. None of that conception was there before. They were just cosmological entities out there that are unchanging. You know, and they have planets orbiting them, and that's unchanging. And then they thought species were unchanging. And you can, if you want to now go back to like why even had those people had those conceptions, that shit is even older, going back to at least Plato 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
All of it is nonsense. And we didn't know for a long time, you know, like here's an interesting argument I hear all the time. Something like, so unrelated, but it's connected. The reason they know morality is not objective is because we haven't agreed. We've been talking about it for millennia and we haven't agreed. Therefore, we can't agree, and there isn't something we can agree on. It's a really weird thing for people to say, because then I always throw it back to, well, also we still don't agree on the shape of the earth. But that's not a problem for physics. You get what I mean? It's not a problem for physics that there are people that don't believe in it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a famous way that I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think it's him who puts it in a way that when talking about science, whether it's true or not, it's going to be true regardless of whether you agree with it or not. I can see, though, how this can be frustrating to people who, because of the way that they think that they actually have an even superior knowledge to what science is providing. So let's go back a little bit to when you were talking about evolution, saying that, well, people don't know about evolution because or don't understand evolution because they don't know it. When in fact, many of the people now arguing against evolution do have some knowledge of it. I wouldn't say it's very proficient knowledge, but it's knowledge enough for them to engage with some of the basic ideas. The problem here is not that they don't know. The problem is that they have another set of ideas, religious ideas, some kind of a different ideology that they think is true, has some kind of an intellectual supremacy over whatever else is there. And if there's some kind of a contradiction, whether it's seeming contradiction or real contradiction, the other theory has to be wrong. So it's not that they don't understand the theory, it's that they have that rigid thing in the background that everything else needs to conform with.
It's so rigid that it lets people do, or it sort of pushes people to do this kind of thing, which I did. I remember, when I first learned evolution, first of all, I learned it without Islamic context. Like, I'm in school. I already knew about Islam from earlier age. And now I'm learning about evolution, but they're not talking about it in the context of God or anything. And then when the first time that I tried to connect the two, it was like, well, duh, God made evolution.
Well, let me give you the contrast from my perspective.
Okay.
Because when we learned about evolution in school, I remember it was literally one single paragraph in a biology book, and it was talking about it in a very negative way, that it contradicts religion. So that the science book wasn't talking about it from a scientific point of view. It was talking about it as a kind of a theory that people have discarded already. And this is actually a very common view that many Arabs have. In fact, if you go and look up the times that Al Jazeera claimed that the theory of evolution has been discarded, it's so many times. And it gives you a pause. If it has been discarded so many times, why does it keep getting discarded? Is there something wrong that requires?
Let's clarify for people. The theory of evolution we have now is not the exact same as the theory of evolution presented the first time in Darwin's book. It's a different conception now. Originally, the conception was that the individuals or species are the things doing the competing. They're not. It is the genes competing with other genes in the gene pool, and the species is just a host.
And one of the main things right now, when you're looking at the backbone of current biology, it's evolution and genetics. And at the time of Darwin, he had absolutely no conception of what's actually is the medium for carrying genetic information. Even though Mendel at the time was actually experimenting with peas and with all sorts of hybridizing them and coming up with a scheme of genetics, I think it's concurrent or a little bit after him. but this wasn't knowledge that was available to him, so he had absolutely no idea. Although he did make some speculations that were somewhat related.
Let's see. Kat is saying Neil deGrasse Tyson isn't good at science communication, but he is basically forced by his circumstances to be in the limelight and to do that. I think in general he is good, but I've seen him say some things that are wrong, and I don't think it's a miscommunication. I think he has it wrong.
I shouldn't actually, when I'm trying to quote him, I'm as a quote, just quoting something, someone doesn't mean that I'm viewing that person as an authority. I'm just quoting as saying that I believe I heard him say. He's really good at formulating certain ideas in a very memorable way. So I think there was one time when he was talking about the God of the Gaps. There's a religious show or something that deals with religion on PBS, and he explained it in a very very powerful way that is very easy to understand for people. That doesn't mean that the body of the things that he does is great. And I would actually connect this with someone prior to him, someone who taught him, who's Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was a scientist. He produced things, but he was not a great scientist. He was a very good science communicator. You cannot attribute something like the theory of relativity.
Where would you put him on the level of Feynman?
He doesn't compare.
Feynman is way ahead, like
way ahead. I mean,
Feynman was also a great communicator, but he was creating some physics stuff.
Yeah, no, it's I don't think there's comparison. Carl Sagan is a really wonderful person when it comes to astronomy. He had some really nice things to contribute about the atmosphere of Venus in particular and its composition.
So to be clear, it is a big feat to get to the level of being a good enough communicator about these things, because it means they learned the stuff close to the degree that the original guys invented. You know what I mean? Like you and me, okay? We didn't invent anything, but I think it was a pretty big feat that we're able to learn these things that were invented.
Yeah, no, and unfortunately for many scientists who are really good, they are not necessarily good communicators. So
yeah.
Very, very common that you can see that. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that Neil deGrasse Tyson is some kind of an authority, but I think he is an influential person who says good things.
Kat made a good point. We were talking about how the original conception of evolution, it was focused on individuals or species rather than genes. The newer conception focused on genes, and Kat is saying here that we probably went too far in seeing genes as everything, and now we're getting away from that a little bit. She gave an example. There's no perfect correspondence between genes, protein coding, and so on.
And you can add on that epigenetics.
And
and
then let's add on something way bigger than all of it: mimetic genes, mimetic evolution. So real quick, I'll just say we've had genetic evolution for a long time, but as soon as we kept people alive with medicine just long enough to have babies, genetic evolution stopped because we cut out half of it. You know, people, you have to die because of your bad genes before you have kids in order for evolution to work, genetic evolution. So mimetic evolution has usurped genetic evolution. Yeah, I don't think people think about that one very much. When they do think about evolution, they only think about genes. They're not even noticing the mimetic issue. And I mean everyone, not just the religious people that are arguing against genetic evolution. I mean even the other people who highly think of genetic evolution. Like all the psychologists. If you look at all their papers, no one mentions memes as a potential thing causing, as a partial causal factor in our behavior.
I would say probably many do adopt some of the ideas, but not necessarily the paradigms of memes as such. Some of them would put it in a different way.
Do you know who this person is? Philip Ball.
I know the name, but I don't. Not
So
very.
Kat is saying they wrote a book on biology, good at explaining these nuances that we're talking about. Oh, Kat, do you know if he talks about memes, meme theory? And by memes, I mean like the way David Joyce talked about it in The Beginning of Infinity, and the way before that, The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins. Let's see. Okay, so let's see. We've been dancing around this. Okay, let's talk about this again real quick as we're talking about this. I think one big way people get confused in the God debate is they see arguments against particular God theories or something, and they get confused with, they mash up a bunch of different God theories into one or something. So, like as an example, you'll see Muslims argue for why there should be a God, and then when they're done doing that, they're like, therefore, Islam, as if that was one theory, the plain God theory, just that there is a God, and the Islam, as if it's one thing. If you argue for one, you're arguing for the other. They're totally different things. Now, in the reverse way, when I make a criticism of a God theory, potentially that could criticize 1,000 God theories rather than just one. I can have a criticism of a God theory, and that refutes, let's say, half of the religions.
I think that many people actually do realize this huge gap, and at least coming to mind right now on the Christian side, there's William Lane Craig, who doesn't only argue for the existence of a God, he also argues for the various doctrines of Christianity as something that would arise naturally. He provides arguments for that. So I think if you're creative enough, you can come up with all sorts of fictions that would connect this aspect to this aspect. But in reality, when you're looking at it, the very idea of the presence of a creator as such does not give rise to any of the specifics that you would get in any of the religions. But that on its own, if you're just looking at it, and even if you go back to the basic arguments that appeared in the Middle Ages, they talk about a first mover in the language of Aristotle. They talk about a first cause or something like this. And I think it's with Saint Augustine, with the way that he phrases things, and therefore God, like you just said. So he jumps to the conclusion immediately, and that this is God, and therefore it's the Christian doctrine. Of course, there's absolutely no way to make that jump, but the one of the arguments that they very often produce, and this is something that's related specifically to monotheism, is that if there is one God, then whatever it is that we're doing the argument for or against, we're talking about that same God. And so if you're able to demonstrate that, for example, Christianity has merit as a true religion of some sort, or if you do the same argumentation for Islam, then whatever God that you're talking about there must be that same God that you would arrive at using natural theology, using these arguments that are based on either logical consistency, like the ontological set of arguments, or by looking at causation, like the cosmological arguments, and so on.
All right, I have two more things I want to talk about, two more things that help us discuss this, and then maybe we could talk about actual, so far we haven't even made any claims about whether there's a God or not. Okay, the Islamic framework I've been saying it like this now. The way Islam wants you to think is, if there's something true in Islam, therefore Islam is from God. Now, they don't say it that way, but you can see it when they talk about miracles. Oh, look, there's this miracle. It's so amazing. Therefore, Islam. And it doesn't say something like, oh, look, this miracle is so amazing. Therefore, you can ignore all the flaws you already see in Islam and then conclude that Islam is real. It's in reverse. The proper framework is, if there's one thing that's wrong, therefore it is man-made. So if there's two things that are right and one thing that is wrong, it's wrong. A million things that are right and one thing that is wrong, it's wrong. Now in physics, what we do is, we have a theory. Let's say a million parts of it are right. One part is wrong. We throw it out. But we don't go back from scratch. We'll change it and try to come up with another version from the original that doesn't have the flaw, and then judge that one separately. Now, I don't know exactly how you might do that.
Well, yeah. Well, related to that, one of the main things about, or one difference that you have between the type of thinking that comes up in religion versus science, is that in the case of religion, you don't have a lot of moving parts, the rigidity that we talked about before. So if you take a book like the Quran, this is supposed to be fully true. From the first page to the very end, it's going to be true in a literal sense. And it's going to be very hard to contradict it. This means that if you're going to be encountering any kind of contradiction, you have to align whatever it is that's contradicting it from the outside with the text of the Quran, or to reinterpret the text in a way that makes it so that there is no contradiction on the face of it anymore.
Well, let's talk about, I don't know if you were trying to say more, but let's talk about the motivation of trying to reinterpret the Quran to fit some external evidence. What they're doing there is confirmation bias. They're trying to look for a way to prove it true instead of looking for a way to prove it wrong.
Yeah.
Or another way to say this is, they're looking for evidence that agrees with their theory so they don't have to change their mind, instead of looking for evidence that disagrees with their theory, because then they would have to change their mind.
And what I can say on top of that is that what you explained is something that they would agree with, and they would say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with it because that's the way that it should be, because they have the truth. If they have the truth, why are you going to be trying to change anything about it? You're going to look at anything else that might contradict it and try to align things with it. And that's the problem, that if you're not willing to even contemplate the idea that you might be wrong in some fashion, then you go into that kind of dogmatic way of assuming that what you have is immutable. It cannot be changed. And therefore, you have to have everything agree with it. Anything that disagrees means it's wrong or misunderstood.
Now, in Feynman's words, it's not even just that you have to admit you might be wrong or whatever. You have to bend over backwards to find how you might be wrong.
Yeah.
To the point that what we put in scientific papers, there's a section called like potential error, where I could have gone wrong. And you're trying to outline for future people all the ways you think maybe you could have gone wrong, bending over backwards. So that other people who then go judge your work, they can expand on that. And, because if you don't do that, then you're doing the opposite, which is you're hiding mistakes in your work, trying to make it hard for people to catch the mistakes.
In theoretical physics, it's very hard to hide things. In experimental science, especially if you're thinking about something like maybe some medical experiments or something that requires experimentation with things that require you to go into the lab and make measurements, it's possible to create some form of an illusion. And there are certain examples of fraud that went into some scientific papers like that. Um, but for the most part, in the case of something like theoretical physics, what you have in the paper is exposed fully in the open. Anybody can go, and the reproducibility of what you're doing is done directly by looking at that content. But yeah, absolutely. If you want to have any kind of theory gain respectability, you have to be able to reproduce the results. You have to put the theory to tests that try to see, is this right or wrong. Let me come up with
And in that way, it's collaborative.
yeah, and there is no such thing as someone coming up, especially with experimental science, coming up with a theory, and then people say, well, that new theory has to be the way things are. You have to have some other group try to reproduce the results, try to see how robust these results are by putting it to tests, and essentially trying to falsify it.
Okay, so one more thing I want to talk about before we maybe answer the question: is God real or not? So if you imagine, if you were to write down Islam as a tree of ideas, there's a lot of ideas in there. And the more ideas that are in there, the easier it is to find, the more opportunity there is to find critical evidence. You can find, there'll be potentially more contradictions between the things within Islam, and contradictions between Islam and other things that we know. And if you put this on a scale, like this range being more stuff in the theory, and on the other end of the scale is just like only one thing in the theory. Well, on this end of the scale, it'd be hard to refute it. It's less opportunity to find critical evidence. But it also means that the less it says about reality. So on this end of the scale, if you might imagine a theory that says, okay, there's a God, he made the universe, and that's it. He didn't do anything else. No more features attached to it. No more claims. Maybe there's other things, but we're not making any claims about it. Well, maybe that's hard to refute, or let's say even let's suppose it is impossible to refute. Well, now it's meaningless anyway. It doesn't have any effect on your life. It's almost like saying, okay, God is the universe. Well, how's that different than just the universe then?
I also think that sometimes when you're trying to evaluate the merits of a theory, very often in the case of physics, this is not a rigorous way, but you look at how simple the theory is and what kind of powerful implications you can extract from it.
Predictive power.
Yeah. So the predictive power and the simplicity of the original ideas, the underlying ideas themselves, is also a very good indication that you have something that could be very robust. Like in the case of general relativity, you look at the actual basic idea as encapsulated in Einstein's equations, and then you look at the wide spectrum of the things that we have right now at cosmological levels, and you don't see contradictions with what we have. So everything that we are seeing up to this point is in concordance with what you would expect from the predictions of the theory. That's a very powerful theory because it started from a really a small set of ideas, but is capable of such predictive power and has withstood so many different tests to refute it, and so far it's still standing.
It also predicted all those tests.
Yeah, it predicted the tests, and it's still when you have a certain measurement and you go and make a comparison between that measurement and what the theory is expecting, you see that it's as far as we know, it's in concordance, and that's something powerful. Now, the idea that there is a God, this is actually not a very strong statement when it really comes to its predictive power.
It has no predictive power. The theory of God that just says there's a God, on this end of the scale that has no features in it, except for there is a God that made the universe. It has zero predictive power.
And
so it is pointless.
Let me say specifically why this is going to be a really bad predictive theory. So God is supposedly a person, a mind, like we're fashioning God after us. So if God is after the same as humans, and humans supposedly make decisions that come only inside their mind, you cannot really explain those from the outside unless you're really looking on the inside. If you're doing that and you're assuming that God is doing the same thing, that's actually telling you that anything that you're seeing that's the result of the work of God is the result of whim. That's not prediction. That's just saying, okay, I don't know how it's going to be explained, but there is going to be some kind of a higher mind that's capable of understanding it. It's just pushing away the problem and not understanding it.
So let me try to analyze what you're doing here. So you're saying if somebody, the simplest theory of God is that there is a God that made the universe. Are you saying that even that statement necessarily is trying to put human elements onto God?
Yeah, absolutely. I because
he made a choice to make the universe.
Yeah, and you're
he had the choice not to make the universe too, right?
And you're projecting the idea of personhood on something that absolutely doesn't show any kind of sign of personality. We can until this time we debate whether chimpanzees have consciousness and personality similar to us, even though we are so close and we can examine them. How is it that they dare to say that there's some entity that exists possibly outside of space-time that has those features? It's so ludicrous. It's meaningless.
Okay, we're 53 minutes in. We've been dancing around the topic. You want to refute Allah real quick?
Well,
how would you do it? Because people come into the ex-Muslim subreddit all the time. Prove to me Islam is not real, and a lot of times it's not adversarial. They want to be convinced. They're like, prove it to me. So what would you say to someone? Or you have practice with this?
That the problem with the idea of the monotheistic God is that it's a very complex God in the sense that it has so many different parts put together. One of them is the creator that we were just talking about. But another one is that this creator has some kind of a relationship with humans, and that it controls the natural phenomena in such a way that you can pray to God in order to control it. You have a certain relation where the God is going to be having you accountable for your deeds. So this also has a dimension in ethics. And so in order to refute something like that, you have to actually unpack it and decompose this entity into its components to look at each component, what it says. So what we were doing just now is looking at the creative aspect that's usually attributed to God. But then you also have other dimensions that have nothing to do with creativity or the creative ability of that God, that have to do with the history of that religion, with what actually goes into the religion in terms of its tenets, whether ethical or what kind of claims it says about the universe. So each one of these on its own is a kind of an indirect refutation, or at least an examination. If you want to be neutral about the way that you're approaching this, you're trying to examine each one of these on its own. Now, what I'm claiming here is that people who approach this the first time from within Islam, they have been indoctrinated not to look at this critically enough to see if there are issues with it or not. And so you have to actually start looking at what other people, or to try to divest yourself essentially from that heritage that you have, and try to start looking at it more objectively to see what each component is really saying. That, of course, is the big part, because how would you divest yourself from something if you're so invested in it? And it's that little jump that would be required in order to switch on, if you will, that critical faculty to start looking at these things.
What I tell people when it's the first time I meet them, they ask, like, why do you believe there's no God? I first say a framework issue, which is, well, first you got to decide how you're going to judge the issue. And I say, Islam wants you to judge it this way. If there's one thing that's true, therefore Islam is from God. And I say, that doesn't make any sense. The proper framework is, if there's one thing that's wrong, then it's man-made. And then I ask them, I punt at that point back to them, do you know any flaws in Islam? And I wait. That's it. If they don't come back, whatever. If they do come back with a flaw, okay, we're done then. What are you still working on? Now, of course, there's little stuff that happens too, like you'll get this kind of thing. People who try to think in probabilities of truth claims, they'll say, well, what's the probability that that Allah is real, and then the risk of going to hell if you're an atheist? And what's the probability that there is no God, and the risk of nothing happening after you die? And that mathematical calculation leads them to say, okay, I'm just going to believe in God then, just in case.
Well, that's a very problematic way of putting it, because if you're talking about probabilities, you have to have the distribution to say if this is a big risk or not. Like if you have a coin and you're flipping the coin and you end up with a 50-50, that's not the same thing as throwing a die and you have 1/6. So you don't know how many sides you have to this to begin with in order to quantify that probability.
Or said another way, and I think this is partly what is implied from what you said, it's you can't think of probabilities. It's all nonsense. Probabilities make sense in a different way, where you have a theory, which of course is flawed, but you have a theory that it has some level of accuracy in describing reality. And that theory makes predictions about probabilities of events happening. That's where probability matters. But it's not the probability of whether the theory is true. It's just saying, if the theory is true, here's the probabilities of events happening.
Well, believers really like Pascal's wager, because Pascal's wager is actually something that uses probability. And it
I think they're being smart with this smart philosophy.
Yeah, because you're making some kind of a calculation. I'm going to make a wager that if there is a God or there is no God, I'm going to be winning either way. But again, the probability here is being miscalculated, because you can go and say, okay, which God? The moment that you say which God, you're going to start multiplying the possibilities and therefore changing the probability.
Yeah, but the second factor in there is how hellish the hell is. So it gets a bigger multiplier.
Yeah, so you have so many different factors that you can include in this calculation, that the simplistic way, and the problem with something like Pascal's wager is that its simplistic nature is very tempting, because it seems to be something like a gambler can understand. You have this or this, so go and gamble.
Most gamblers are bad at gambling.
Well, gambling is a kind of a bad enterprise if you just look at it from a point of view of probability. You're always going to be, the deck is stacked against you no matter what. But people...
Well, there's a poker, and a lot of poker isn't just, probabilities of the next card coming.
Right.
It's also reading the face of the other guy.
Yeah.
Getting in his head, showing some boob. I saw that. There's a girl playing next to a guy. The guy's having to make his decision, and her fucking nipple is out. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but that's fucked up. Fucking cheating.
Yeah, that's not probabilities as such. This is also skill in reading people. But I'm talking about situations where you can reduce things to probabilities.
Let's help people understand this way. In other contexts where you might want to use the same kind of logic. So what if somebody asked, okay, what's the probability that our current understanding, how do I say that? Let me say it better. What's the probability of the evolution theory, the best one we have today, that is true, versus the probability that, I don't know, God created all the species and there's no evolution? How do you think about? I just thought of this. How do you think about that? What's the probability that you can't think about probabilities? It's like saying, what's the probability that 1 + 1 = 3?
Well,
how is that helpful?
Okay, let's actually think about that as a kind of a quantifiable probability, and we're going to be thinking about it in a very crude way. So you go look at every piece of evidence and see which side it's going to be better explained with, give a point here or a point here, and that's going to add up to a set of probabilities.
The word they use for that, and this word was used way older than the word probability, weight of the evidence.
Yeah.
And they would use a scale. They would show a scale. You know what I mean? A scale, the old style. There's 2 plates. There's a thing in the middle holding whatever. And then, they, oh, that one wins. Weight of the evidence.
Yeah, and that's exactly the actual term that gets used in probability, because you're going to be weighing different probabilities differently depending on their
all of it is nonsense, because a single refuting piece of evidence completely makes the entire, I'm not talking well here. If you have 1,000 pieces of evidence supporting your theory and one contradicting it, the one contradicting it wins.
Yeah, it's the same as with the presence of a counterexample in logic. Just one single counterexample can completely refute.
That's why they talk about the famous example they talk in philosophy is black swans.
Yeah.
If you saw 1,000 black swans and no other color, and then if you ask, something like, if you have a theory, all swans are black,
it's usually the other way around. It's all are white.
Oh, is it white? Okay. So the theory is all swans are white, and you happen to see 1,000 swans, and if you see another swan, it that is white, it strengthens your theory because there's more weight. But if you find one black swan,
that's going to
it refutes the theory, and the weight didn't matter, and weight never mattered.
Yeah, and that's a kind of a generalization of a way that usually mathematical statements are produced. But the difference in that case is that in mathematical statements, you're actually able to deductively show that if there's some kind of a counterexample, that's going to completely refute that. In the case of something observable, something measurable in the real world, you have to actually go and produce that counterexample.
All right. Hey, we're getting corrected here. There are black swans in Australia.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
No, I know. It's funny. It's funny.
Yeah, that's exactly the point.
Wait, so by the way, the history of this concept, was there a time where people thought all swans are white?
Yeah, that's
okay. So it's real.
Yeah.
It's just a demonstration.
No, that's how it started.
Interesting. All right. By the way, I'm not in a hurry to leave today, so we don't have a hurry. Do you or anyone else want to talk about Allah or God any further before we talk about other things? Usama, you got anything?
I'm looking here at some of the.
There's a lot of talk that's not related to what we're talking about. It looks like.
Okay.
Or it is and it's loosely connected. I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, possibly. I'm not sure. Yeah. So I mean, the topic of Allah in particular, or God in general, it's so wide. Again, because of the fact that if you look at the history of Allah, or the history of the Judeo-Christian God, it's one that basically accumulated several components until it came to what it was. So this illusion of monotheism, as if it were just one single monolith, it's really lumping into it so many different things. And I think that's part of the elusiveness that the idea creates, which makes it so hard to pinpoint very often what people mean. So when the very first time when you proposed this idea for this podcast, and I was looking at the title, uh, Allah is real or a figment of imagination. Well, first of all, the very first thing that I would ask the person, can you define what you mean by God? Because it's unlike a table where I can go see a table. When you say God, it's like when you're saying glove. I have to know exactly what the person in front of me actually means by that word.
Wait,
Because
Sam, are you saying there's no love?
maybe.
I
Well,
know what you mean, but even with love, like love isn't one thing. It's a word that describes many different things.
that's exactly my point. So whenever I'm talking with someone and they mention, do you believe in God? Well, I have to know exactly first what you mean by God, so that I can address specifically what you have in mind. Because sometimes people would say, yeah, I believe in the old man with the big beard in the sky, and that's God. And someone else would come and say that love is God, for example. I've heard people say that. Some people would say mathematics is God. So depending on what they actually mean by the word, it's going to be very, very hard to pinpoint what it means, because it does not correspond to anything. It's a
And
very loose.
and by the way, a lot of people, when they're presented with that kind of question, they don't even want to answer. They don't want to answer more details about their God theory because they know what that means. It's going to be easier to refute the fucking thing.
Yeah, and so it's very hard. So very often when I throw in that question, okay, what do you mean by God? Well, I mean the creator. Where did all this come from? Well, if I want to think about this from the point of view of science, as far as I'm concerned, uh, God was a scientific hypothesis. So Victor Stenger had basically an entire book dedicated to this idea of uh, examining God as a scientific hypothesis. And it is a valid scientific hypothesis in the sense that it has predictions that you can go and check based on what religion says. And the conclusion here is that it's a bad scientific hypothesis. So if I want to think about it from this perspective, I would think about God in the same way that physicists think about ether today. Ether used to be a very big thing in the 18th and 19th century. People thought unless there is ether there, electromagnetic waves cannot propagate. And then they started loading it with all sorts of various features in order to account for everything that explains why it is hidden, why it is something that we cannot measure directly. And then after a while, when Einstein came and produced relativity, it turned
It didn't
out
need the ether.
exactly you don't need the ether. It's not that I'm necessarily refuting the idea of God in principle. I'm saying that it's a needless
So
idea.
let me say it another way. I think this is basically what you're saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. Karl Popper explained. Karl Popper's died in the 70s. He did his work kind of recently. He explained that all ideas are intended to solve problems. And what the way to judge whether an idea is any good is to check that it actually solves the problem that it's intended to solve. Now, that's what we do in physics. A physics idea, a theory, is intended to make predictions, accurate ones. And then the way we check if it's any good is to see that it actually makes accurate predictions. Does our experimental results match what we thought was going to happen? So then we should ask that about any idea. Okay.
Yeah.
So the God idea. I would like to ask Muslims or anyone else who believes in God, what is the problem that idea is intended to solve? And then let's check that it actually solves it. I've had this discussion before, and what you get back is something really weird. God solves all problems.
Yeah. That's exactly the idea behind monotheism, especially when you're trying to say that this is the absolute single truth. It's supposed to be solving everything, and that's exactly the motto that the Muslim Brotherhood raises on their flags. Islam is the solution. That's exactly what they mean. That everything that you have as a problem can find its solution there. Where does Islam derive its ability to solve all problems? From the highest authority in the universe. And so that's basically.
Well, Islam didn't help me with the problem I had right before I left Islam. I left Islam when I saw a loved one. She started believing she's possessed by jinn. And instead of going to hospitals or recognizing maybe she has mental illness or something, she went to exorcists. They don't use that word, obviously. It's a dude that he's a sheikh or something. I'm going to say a few things and then it's going to get rid of the jinn. And then she didn't believe that he got rid of the jinn. And I wonder if he knows what he's doing is bullshit, and maybe he thinks, well, if I just tell her the jinn is gone, maybe it'll be better.
Well, if most of these people take money for their services.
Yeah, he got money.
So I would say probably he's a bullshitter.
Okay.
And he knows it.
Some of them maybe believe it, right?
You probably have to have some level of belief in what you're doing. Although I think what happens after a while is that this boundary between truth and lies starts to get blurred, and they're just living a kind of a reality that has this as part of who they are.
So I presented this little story by saying Islam didn't help me with these problems. And it's trying to address a problem. Having the concept of jinn is trying to address a problem. The concept of jinn itself is trying to address a problem.
And if based on what you're describing, it is creating the problem and creating a fictitious solution of the problem. Because if you're not a believer in Islam to begin with, the idea of jinn is not going to be there, at least not in that form.
In some sense, all of our physics theories are fictitious solutions to our problems. Fictitious in the sense that we're going to find a better theory later. So the future theories will be more accurate than the theories we have today. But it's, I wonder if you meant a little bit more meaning than just wrong when you said fictitious.
Well, I wouldn't even say that there is any theory that is true in the sense of true. The way that theories describe nature isn't that it's telling you how things really are, but it's trying basically to simulate in a mathematically rigorous way as much as possible the behavior of nature. That's basically what it does. It's not trying to explain, but rather to describe. So that's not quite the same thing.
So just an example, we had Newton's classical mechanics, certain understanding of like orbits. It had you could use it to understand how our orbits work of our planets, and but it failed to predict which thing that Einstein's theory correctly predicted.
Right.
Something about celestial objects.
So for Mercury, in
Mercury,
yeah, the orbit of Mercury has a certain anomaly that needed.
So did they know that? Did Isaac Newton know that anomaly?
Yeah, he knew that his theory didn't actually exactly match what's experimentally shown, and the way that he tried to resolve this was to say every once in a while, like a clock, God comes and whines like a spring
That
winds.
fucker said that.
Uh, Maybe not in those
That's
words,
the
but
God of the Gaps bullshit.
yeah, basically he said that God comes. Well, Newton was a very religious person. He actually spent
He
more
came up with the
time.
amazing things in his 30s or late 20s, early 30s, and then he died in his 80s, and he spent 50 years just looking at the Bible.
Yeah, looking at numerology and alchemy and all sorts of things to explain ideas in the Bible and to predict things about the end of times. It was a weird thing, but that's who Newton is.
Yeah. Well, it definitely says something about humanity in general. You can extract something from it. Like, no matter how dumb you are, you can be really smart. Or another way to say it is, no matter how smart you are, you can be really dumb. Another way I've been saying it recently is, even if you find the smartest people alive today, the most knowledgeable, they're still wrong on a few really major issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that means me and you too. I
Yeah.
don't know and the point is, we don't know what they are yet.
Well, we might have some idea about it, and other people might have some ideas about it. And the thing here is that even though sometimes the claims might appear to be stated in a kind of way as if they were true, on the contrary, what needs to be done here is that if we, for example, make a mistake or say something wrong, someone needs to come and correct that. We would be more than happy to hear that and to acknowledge that issue.
I like a way that this was stated by a guy named Elliot Temple. He said, or he says often, if you were wrong, by what mode? How are you going to find out? I'm butchering it. I'm sorry, but it's trying to leave a door open.
Yeah.
Everyone should have for every one of your ideas. If I'm wrong about this idea, how am I going to find out? Am I leaving a good avenue for people to tell me? I mean, by the way, one plain thing is, don't be a jerk to people, because they won't want to educate you. So, where was I going with this?
No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's when you're looking at any kind of ideology, whether it's religion or not, the fact that you have this illusion of possessing the truth means that you're going to be impervious to all these error correction techniques, or you're not going to be open in the first place to talk to people about possible mistakes you might have, because you don't believe that there are mistakes in the first place. And the problem here is that even though you might be seeing the consequences of these mistakes manifest in various aspects of your life or in front of you unfolding, you're going to be in denial. You're going to be pretending that no, there's no mistake there. You're actually misinterpreting this, or things are not really what they seem to be. And that kind of denial is what expresses the rigidity of religion and all those ideologies that don't actually see any possibility of criticism.
Okay. So just that last thing I said was, all ideas are intended to solve problems. What problem is your God theory intended to solve? Explain that, and then we will check it to see if it actually solves that problem. That's it. I don't know if this is the last part of this series.
I mean, it's a very wide topic. We've been coming from various perspective at it, but I can definitely see the possibility of this extending significantly longer. But I don't think that we need to do something right away about a third part.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, for all the series we have, just because we've stopped them so far and did other things, we could start them again.
Yeah.
We might have, if we're doing this for 30 years, we might have what is the future of Islam, part 46.
Yeah, I mean that exactly is the very spirit of what we just talked about. If what you said at one point was the definitive thing and you're not willing to revisit it, that's actually defying that very same principle that you might be wrong, or that you possibly didn't tackle certain aspects and you now want to revisit that. So yeah, absolutely.
But also the environment changes. So 500 years from now, Muslims are going to have different things that they're thinking about than Muslims today, and they're going to need different arguments.
Well, I wouldn't jump 500 years from now. Possibly 50 years is a good range, and I would probably say things are going to be different 50 years from now. I mean, if you look at how things have changed over thousands of years, you don't see a lot of change. You might see certain epochs where things jump very quickly from one thing to another, but the changes that we have been seeing over the past couple of centuries, these were really big changes. And so if the pace continues, something like Islam or any other religion is definitely going
So
to
as an example, let's say aliens revealed themselves to us. Now that's a whole new set of discussion topics that Muslims will need to hear.
Oh, if aliens revealed themselves, this is going to be.
Oh wait, there's an episode. If aliens revealed themselves, and I mean like to everybody, not just a few of us.
Well, if it's to a few of us, then it would be the same kind of schizophrenia that might have led Abraham to speculate about having some kind of an entity asking him to kill his son, or a Muhammad.
Well, it's one alien that shows himself. Yeah, I mean, look in the there people do talk about this, by the way, in the context of ancient Egypt and many other places, where what they think maybe happened is an alien came, and it's such advanced technology that we said, "Oh, that's God."
Yeah, but at the same time, I think when it comes to this proposal of ancient aliens, I think it's just a lazy. It's just a lazy theory that doesn't really want to look at the archaeology, doesn't want to look at what people have really did.
Yeah, it's not a scientific inquiry, really. It's just playing around with ideas. Can we do some housekeeping?
Sure.
So this person in the ex-Muslim subreddit said they just told their father that they left Islam, and they're asking for some sort of help. So, and it's not on the screen yet, but they made a comment. I replied asking questions to try to find out what they're worried about. They have a fear. And they replied saying, "My fear is that I will ruin my family's life." I'm going to say all of her parts before saying my reply. And then she said, "My fear is that my baby will not have the chance to get to know her other family. My fear is that my truth will kill my dad instead of saving him. And I wish I could save them." And I replied to each of these parts, but it's not your fault that your family hates you. That's their fault. They are the ones ruining their lives. To the part about her baby not have the chance to know her other family, I said, yeah, that sucks, but the alternative is worse. To the part about my truth will kill my dad, I said it won't kill him, but even if it did, it's his own ideas that caused the killing. And she said, I wish I could save them, her parents. And I replied, you can, but only if they actually try to learn from you. You can't save a drowning person while they are kicking and hitting you as you try to save them from drowning. And she replied, this made me cry. You are right, and I needed to hear this. I will keep reading this and again. Thank you so much for this. And you know what's interesting is I can't predict when someone's going to really find something that mattered to them a lot, you know. Like, I didn't expect she's going to come back saying, this made me cry. I didn't, you know what I mean? Like, this is just me saying very plain things about who's actually at fault.
I mean, yeah, you're stating facts, but sometimes, especially if you're stating facts that might be painful, is not necessarily the emphasis that you want at the moment. Not that this is wrong, but I mean, it depends on the kind of emotional and psychological effect that this person would be receiving from whatever is being stated here. I mean, it's great that this was the reaction, but I can imagine other reactions that might be negative as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can tell from my reply, I don't have like flowery language or anything. You know, I'm not saying things like things will get better. Don't worry. You know, I think all those things are fake, especially since you don't really know. It could easily get worse.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the person. If this particular reply matches what the person actually eventually wants, that's fine. But I can also imagine, and I'm talking from my own experience, that's okay if the situation is not dire, in the sense that if I were to stay, I'm not going to be living a hell, for example. I might make some compromises and say, okay, I'm going to get by until I see some better opportunities and then act. But yeah, I think it depends on the person.
Well, a lot of people in this scenario are not looking at the alternatives. They're not doing that very well. They're so emotional about their situation. They're having a hard time even thinking about what could happen if the other, you know, comparing the two possibilities of tell your parents and go down that route versus stay closeted and go down that route. I don't think they do very well thinking about it. So, and that's all I'm doing is exposing that a little bit.
Yeah. And I think the lived situation itself is going to probably be the best way that would help the person make a good decision that eventually they're not going to regret. So it could be the case that maybe there is some danger that is accompanied here. So if that's the case,
well, there's look the very plain danger is you lost your family, and they were your support structure. Even though they were abusing you, they were also supporting you. And telling your parents might mean losing your family, and that is a rough life. I don't even know what that's like. I've never had that.
Yeah, but what I was thinking about is that if there's some danger in staying in that situation, because that's also a possibility.
Oh, the other direction. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I had for housekeeping. The only other thing left is to talk about what we're going to talk about next week. And let's see. The new idea I have is to talk about superstitions.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to have certain. So it's probably a lengthy topic that's not necessarily something that you can finish in one go, or to cover satisfactorily in one go.
Yeah. Did we ever do one on jinn? I don't think we did.
No.
So maybe we can do one on superstitions first, and then later do one on jinn, or we'll do a series on superstitions and jinn is one of the parts, something like that.
Well, jinn is a rather uh, complicated subject in the sense that they are specifically an Arabian kind of entity, but at the same time, the the ideas about them that we have right now are also informed by biblical stories. So it's a kind of a mix of two different things. Um, it's very specific compared to talk about superstition in general.
Uh, I also have humans. Were we created or did we evolve? Islam versus science, Big Bang, evolution. That seems like a natural continuation to this one.
Which one? The creation of humans?
No,
Or
no, to this one being the Allah, is Allah real? The reason I say that is a lot of people hold up the idea of God because of their conception of, humans being so amazing. How they couldn't be here by accident, like
No, but here's the thing. That's not the main component for most people. For most people, and let me here maybe put something specifically related to Christians. They supposedly have a personal relationship with God. They talk to God and have a conversation with Him. So it's a kind of an ongoing, everyday thing where
don't
God.
Muslims have a version of that where they say, I've heard Muslims say things like, when I was a Muslim, I didn't have an emotional connection to God. Is that the kind of thing you mean?
Yeah, but the problem is somewhat different, because for Muslims, like in the case of Jews, God is more transcendent. For Christians, God came down, took the form of a human, died as a human, etc., and supposedly now is alive somewhere else and is still interacting with them in one way or another, answering.
Because they made him a human, they have a lot more personification
Yeah. So
and more of a relationship with him.
and you get into this kind of tension where medieval Christian thinkers uh, try to create a kind of an abstraction of that God, but at the same time you have this very personal aspect that cannot be escaped from.
So I don't know where we ended up. What do you think is a natural continuation after talking about God? This episode right here.
Well, we have two different directions. One of them is, since we were talking about God as a possible real or imaginary entity, superstition would be a natural direction, because that's going to include various superstitions. On the other hand, and this again falls under the same category of this vagueness of the idea of God, because it has so many different aspects to it. You can also talk about the creation of humans, the creation of the universe. So you can also have the possibility of evolution and the Big Bang. So I see two different directions that are still connected with what we're saying.
Let's see if I can break it up then. So if we had a topic, and I want to remind you, the title of the topic, that very first word needs to be the main thing. Instead of I write a sentence that starts with like if or something like that. So if we want to talk about the universe, Big Bang, what made it, should we start with just Big Bang then? Big Bang. What caused it?
What put the bang in the Big Bang, or whatever, something.
Yeah, you're doing the marketing now. Big Bang. What put the bang in it? Or did God put the bang in it? Or now that's like
Something of this sort. I mean, it's
Well, I mean, what I don't like about my idea is you're already sort of choosing what did it and then asking if that's the thing. It should be more open. What put the bang in the Big Bang?
Yeah, possibly.
Oh, and then you could add some more. God? Question mark? Or something else. I guess what we would say is we don't know, but we also have no reason to believe it would be God.
Well, I think I might have pointed out at one point to you a really nice debate between Sean Carroll, he's a physicist and also an atheist, and William Lane Craig about the existence of God. This took place maybe 10 years ago. It was a really fascinating talk because William Lane Craig is knowledgeable in physics. It's not that he's ignorant. On the contrary, he's a very good philosopher, and at the same time, he has some knowledge in physics. But it was so surprising how resistant he was to actually understanding what Sean Carroll was trying to say in that debate. So I can imagine this being a kind of a basis for talking about the Big Bang in that context.
Do you want me to write that down, or you'll remember it?
No, so we can we can remember it probably later on. It's a very prominent thing.
So let's do that next then. Big Bang. And then maybe after that, humans.
Yeah, I guess.
And then maybe after that, superstitions.
Possibly. It would be coming back to some of what we talked about now, revisiting, maybe rehashing, adding some ideas that are related to various other superstitions. Because superstition doesn't only cover superstitious entities, you also have superstitious practices and various things that come in with the idea of ceremony that is very integral to religion in general.
Superstitious practices. Yeah, like I heard one a few days ago from Zorro, which he learned from his dad. What was it? Don't do something at night. I think it was, is it brush your teeth? That would be weird though, because then it's kind of new. You know, I wonder if anyone has tried to document all the superstitions and put them on a map. That would be really interesting. I think that would help a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm sure there's. The problem is that superstitions are very very varied. It's very easy to come up with all sorts of variations to the same idea, because when you're trying to convey it as a kind of a meme from one person to another, it can very easily mutate. So putting it on a map might be a little bit hard, since it's
Well, at least list them.
Yeah, maybe. I'm
and
not
you
sure.
know, and document, you know, who has them.
I have no idea. I didn't check, but
And then also a timeline. When did that superstition start?
Well, the thing about the
And
nine,
when and maybe superstitions that went away. Did some go away?
I'm sure that many did. There are many superstitions that are related to jinn, for example, about, for example, not whistling because this is going to conjure them up.
You know, I was asking Zorro about jinn, the concept, and I asked, so does the Islamic conception of jinn, does it say that the jinn can kill you? He said no. And I was like, okay, so why are people afraid of the jinn if it can't kill you? He said, well, it can fuck with your brain. They say it can fuck with your mind.
Yeah, and supposedly this idea of the genie of the lamp that you can actually control, it's not out of nothing. It comes from a tradition that probably predates Islam, and there are certain texts, one of them called Shams al-Ma'arif, that has incantations and all sorts of things that you can do in order to have the jinn do certain things. And one of the challenges that we usually get in the Arabic Facebook or the Arabic internet, if you're really an atheist, go bring Shams al-Ma'arif and go to a dark place and read some of it.
And they think we would be scared.
Yeah, that you would never be able to do.
Which is horseshit. About the jinn thing, I was saying, I was talking to Zoro further about that, and I said, what we realized is, okay, so people are afraid of jinn not because the jinn can kill you or like make you trip and fall. It can get in your mind and make you do crazy things. So people are afraid of jinn because they fear that they're gonna go crazy, which then makes them crazy.
If you look at the jinn in the Quran as such, they're given in a kind of a different light. It's given as a kind of a different set of being that have their own civilization, that they have their own prophets and so on. So it's a kind of a different species, if you will, that lives in parallel with us.
Here's a weird contradiction. I see this as a contradiction. If jinn can actually do all these things, then it can kill you. But no one's fearing that part of it.
Well, what you can do is to, well, I probably need to check because this is just a superstition to begin with. What you can do is to control certain jinn for you to do certain things. Because supposedly the origin of this whole thing starts from the story of Solomon, and Solomon supposedly was able to control devils, and in Islam this is a very prominent thing, but it also has some roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
If we have the power to persuade jinn, I say persuade, I don't know what you mean by control. How would you control a jinn? Do you mean like talk to him and convince him?
Well, again, this is going into details that I'm not really sure, but since there are certain incantations that some people believe in, I'm supposing that you can control.
So it loses its willpower.
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Sort of like a hypnosis.
Yeah, I mean, we can check this, but I never really went into what people believe about these. I know about the generalities of this, but I also know that the religious aspects that are usually traditionally taught about jinn as something to have some fear about. There, for example, there is a whole chapter, Surah al-Jinn, in the Quran that supposedly talks about a kind of an encounter that Muhammad had at a certain night with the jinn, and then you start having stories in the hadith that get weaved around this.
All right, so we have so many theological topics we're still talking about. I guess we should continue doing those before we do like I'm looking at my list of topics. Night of Entry. That's very interesting. It's not theological. It's more just.
I mean, it's still, and it's a very cultural thing, because once you start looking at the various different cultures, how they view this, but it's a very common concept, and I'm sure it has a lot of basis of or some kind of a shared basis that you can think of.
You mean from that other cultures also have?
I was talking about, or thinking rather, about a religious origin.
Yeah. But before Islam is the point. What I mean by that is the concept of, marriage as the only place where sex can happen. And generally the idea is first marriage is the one that should stick, so that you only have one sexual partner forever. which is kind of like kind of denying that divorce is a thing. But also religion said there's religions that say no divorce. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think Islam is better on that front. You can do a divorce, although it gets it wrong and says only the man can do it. That's so stupid.
There are situations where the woman can have some control, but it's
very narrow. Where what it gives the man is any reason.
Yeah.
It's seeing the man as someone that matters and the woman doesn't matter.
I mean, it's very obvious. A religion that was formulated by males for the benefit of males. This is what you're going to be getting.
Were there any religions that sided with the women?
I mean, supposedly before many of the modern religions, there was a period where you had matriarchy as the main mode of social existence.
Yeah, they don't say Father Nature; they say Mother Nature.
Yeah, so those were older religions, but you can also see some residue of this in Islam. So the three goddesses that are supposedly the daughters of Allah were all daughters.
Wait! I never heard of this. God has kids?
Okay, we talked about this a little bit. The satanic.
What is it? Lam yulad walam.
Lam yalid walam yulad.
Yes, lam.
So
meaning he doesn't have parents or kids.
Yeah. So Allat, Al-Uzza, Manat, these are supposed to be three goddesses that control different things, but they have certain correspondences with some Greek goddesses.
And that means it's not one god, it's four gods then.
No, there's more, but these are the three main ones.
I've never heard of this, dude.
Well, the thing is that Allah was not invented by Islam. Allah existed before Islam.
So these things are not written in the Quran or Hadith?
No, it's written in the Quran. And the thing about it is, though, that the place where it's mentioned in the Quran is supposed to be a refutation of their abilities or their power. However, the story that accompanies that is that there was a period of time where Muhammad gave in and made concessions to Quraysh and said, yeah, these have the ability to conceive, to have some a way for you to have to intercede with God. Many Muslims today deny that, but in the dawn of Islam, they thought this was a natural story. It happened.
All right, well, that's a new contradiction I never knew about. Not that I needed more. One was enough. All right, let's see. Let's look at some older stuff. You know, we haven't talked about really tough topics, like trying to give, people that are considering coming out of the closet or considering leaving their family. I don't even know how to talk about those kind of things. I never did anything like that. Never had faced anything like that. You haven't either, right?
Well, I wasn't comfortable for a few years because I had already left the religion, but I was still living with my parents and not telling them.
Well, did you have a fear of that they're going to disown you?
That fear was there, although I knew and I still believe that the family bond was strong enough that this was never going to happen. But the relation would have been
worse.
And also, I always felt that I would be hurting them.
Can you close the door?
So it felt that I could actually be just causing unnecessary distress. So I never brought it up at the time. But for me personally, it was a really uncomfortable period, and it lasted for several years.
people need to hear that kind of stuff, and I don't think I would be very helpful in it.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm not claiming to be representative of what people should do. Usually, if when someone like that comes to us, I'm talking about the Arabic aspect of this. The first thing is, would you be better off being on your own? If suppose that you felt that living with your family is going to cause some distress, and people who might be underage should probably not think about that as a kind of an option, because they might be putting themselves in unnecessary danger, depriving themselves of the support that would be provided by the family. And
yeah, the kind of advice you see in the ex-Muslim subreddit is stay with your family, use them to get financially independent, then leave.
Yeah, basically that. Especially when you're talking about someone who is underage. Just I mean, I realize that sometimes things can be very distressful, and people can be under a lot of pressure. But at the same time, you just look at the various options that you have. You try to weigh in which is the better of the two choices you have at the moment. It's if there's a possibility for you to wait until you gain financial independence, social independence as well, then you can move out, do whatever you want, as much as the society allows.
All right, so I guess we'll do Big Bang next time.
I mean, we can do Big Bang, we can do superstition, either way.
Cool. All right, do we have anything else to talk about before we go? We have 4 people here. You guys have any questions? Kat is suggesting something. If you want some extra visibility and don't mind straying off topic, you could have a talk about the new Pope. I don't know anything about that. I don't follow it.
I know the new Pope is American. Other than that, I don't know anything about him.
Was this just a couple days ago? That already happened?
I think it was today. But yeah, again, I don't really know much about him other than the fact that he's American.
I don't even know what we would talk about or how it's relevant to.
Yeah, my guess it would be the legacy of Francis, especially that my understanding is that this new Pope is coming from the same direction as Francis. But again, it's not something that I know much about. To be
it just makes me think of a topic we could do. How in Catholicism there's a Pope, and in Islam there's no Pope concept.
I mean, there is no Pope, but there's plenty of institutionalized religion.
Yeah, but it's distributed.
Yeah.
Although if we say Catholicism is like a Sunni Islam, the rest of Christianity doesn't have a Pope.
Well,
that one sect does.
I'm not sure if that analogy is valid to compare Sunni Islam to Catholicism.
Well, I don't know how it doesn't compare, but my point is there's no sect of Islam that has a Pope figure.
Well, there are a lot of venerated figures, if you will, in certain cults. If you go to the Sufis, they venerate special people. The Druze, who are not exactly Muslim, it's a kind of a.
I'm still live.
Yeah, so the Druze also, who are not quite Muslim, but they derive a lot from Islam, they also have special venerated people.
I'm live right now. Jesus Christ. Okay, maybe we should stop now. We're almost 2 hours in. This is the longest one we've done.
Well, anyway, I think Kat's suggestion about looking at Catholicism versus Islam, that could possibly be it.
And then she said maybe comparative religion. topic, comparing a bunch of different religions.
Yeah, and this actually reinforces an idea that we were talking about before, which Daniel Dennett has mentioned. I talked about it before, that educating people about religion is a really important thing. Like having education of religion in school, if you're educating only about your religion, that's problematic. But
Yeah.
if you're teaching people about all the religions, that's what needs to be done.
So I in college, I was studying physics, chemistry, biology, and they make you take a bunch of different classes in different categories. I ended up taking, to fill a requirement, comparative religion. And one difference I noticed in myself was in all the physics, chemistry, biology, math classes, I was so in tune to the teacher. Like I couldn't not listen. In the comparative religion class, I slept half the time. I couldn't listen. And I was a Muslim then for another 10 years after that, 12, 13 years after that. And it's interesting that, I don't know. I wonder why else maybe I didn't like that class. Part of it, I guess, was it was the class that had the most students in it. So you didn't really get to talk to the teacher very much,
Yeah.
Where in physics, I had a class of just 2 people. One professor, 2 students. You get a lot of personal attention there.
Yeah.
And in this comparative religion class, it was a huge hall, and it was so many people, and I'm just in the back, and everyone's loud and talking, and it's hard to hear even the teacher. So I don't know, maybe it wasn't the topic really, and just the way.
No, large classes. When I teach large classes, if it's too many people, I end up basically knowing the names of just a handful. Other than that, it's just other people.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and stop here, and we'll see everyone next time.
Okay.
Take it easy, everyone.